Christene Marie, and we are on day 3 of the 5 habits of Christ as we lead up to Christmas morning and Christmas Day. And I am going live so late tonight. It is 12:17 my time. My family and I, we all went to the Handel's Messiah in Frederick, Maryland, and it was such an amazing experience for those of you who have never been. It's basically put into song different sections of biblical text, and it was just absolutely lovely. And you get to sing and participate, the one that we went to, or you can just kind of sit and listen. And so we were all in the back trying our best to sing along with it, and it was a funny experience. But it was wonderful. It was so fun. And I am so excited for tonight's conversation. Yesterday evening, we were having a very interesting dialogue on YouTube, actually. Folks were actually asking the question, how do you describe God and who is God to you? And it was getting into a very existential conversation. So perhaps we'll actually get into that at some point on the show. But for now, I just want to do a quick recap of the 2 habits that we've discussed so far. The very first habit we kind of went into and dove into was that the fact that Jesus, who is the manifestation of Christ, actually would pull aside every single morning and go and be with his Father and pray. And as I'm saying this, I just realized, let me just do a quick little recon of why I even wanted to do this whole conversation in the first place. And when I'm saying Christ, who do I mean by that? So we're going to circle back to the 2 habits that we've been discussing before getting into habit 3. First and foremost, why am I doing this? 2 weeks ago, I was thinking about, how much I actually am really looking at 2026. Like, I need to analyze the habits that I'm putting into place, because the habits that I put into place can change my life's trajectory. It can make or break my morning, make or break my day. And so over the past couple of years, I've really studied millionaires, those who are most successful in the world by all levels of analysis. I've studied them in the way that they live. And so I'm mirroring and patterning the way that they live. And for example, when I've been really dedicated to my habits, most often when I'm waking up at 4 a.m., which is incredibly early, but when I've been doing that, man, my day has been so incredibly powerful. I've been in alignment. I'm actually kind of in control of my day. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining here. Today, we're talking about habit number 3 of how did Christ live in the physical manifestation and body of Jesus? And so I'm doing a quick just overview of why I wanted to talk about this in the first place. And then we'll get into an overview of the first 2 habits and then habit number 3. So for the reason why I wanted to do this was because I've studied so much other people who have been so successful by all earthly standards and really dove into how have they lived their life. And I've seen it for myself when I start mirroring how they organize their mornings and also their evenings. I have so much more success during the day. And so 2 weeks ago, I was thinking, man, I really live according to the habits of these folks who have been so successful before me. But I actually really want to live in alignment with how Jesus lived. Jesus is the physical manifestation of Christ. And so according to the narrative in the Bible, I'm like, okay, I want to actually live that way. So why not study the habits of the manifestation of Christ? If I want to actually embody Christ and activate Christ in me, because Christ is in every single one of us, then I need to spend time studying that. Not just the greats who are making all the money. I want to study the person who gave all the love. And so I want to start studying both. So that was really what started me on this conversation in the first place, was because I want to add in more balance to who I'm studying from, who I'm learning from, so that I can have a very well-rounded view and frankly be really informed. It's like a lot of what we talk about on the Knowing Show. It's not just about cultivating our intellectual intelligence, and it's also about incorporating and cultivating our emotional intelligence and our spiritual intelligence. We have multiple parts of us that frankly need to be tended to and nurtured and grown so that we can really come to the table and activate our true full self. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm so grateful for you all coming tonight. I'm excited for this conversation. we covered the first habit on Sunday, which was the fact that Jesus would go out quietly in the morning before it was bright outside, before it was fully day, and he would actually steal away and spend time with God in prayer. And so, what that looked like in practice for me in my life, and for so many others too, is actually waking up early in the morning and really getting in control of our day before the world gets a say in it, before everyone else starts in with their expectations and opinions and all the noise and picking up our phone. We actually go inward first. We go to God and say, God, what do you have to say? We actually go inside ourselves and say, are there any emotions that I actually need to process from the day before? Is there anything specifically that I need to grow in and focus on so that I can continue to move on an upward trajectory rather than kind of staying plateau, or worse yet, backsliding because I haven't processed things from the past and they actually are having control over me? So that's habit number one. Habit number two that we really dove into yesterday, man, it was interesting diving into the passage of scripture specifically. It was the verse in Matthew where it says Jesus was led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And so what I kind of pulled forth from that was another habit of Christ, is that he was led by the Spirit. And another element to that is that being tempted, when we're actually moving in the right direction, a lot of times we can view temptation or something that's hard as a sign that we're heading in the wrong direction. But sometimes it's actually a sign that we're exactly where we're supposed to be. So if we're running into roadblocks, if we're experiencing something that's kind of running up against what we hoped for or wanted, maybe it's actually an indication that we're right where we're supposed to be. So those are the two habits that we talked about. One, going out and getting quiet. And then two, being led by the Spirit and being led from within. And actually, the root word, the Latin word of intuition, is intuere, and that means to be taught from within. So really, by going and being quiet, and then to be taught from within, we are then able to be led by the Spirit of God. Honestly, a lot of times it can sound like our voice or it can sound like God's voice. And we need to actually understand what's the difference between both. And then also, what are the voices of shame and the voices of fear? Like there's a lot of competing noise in the world around us, but then sometimes there's competing noise in our own body and in our own mind and heart and soul. So really being able to understand what's going on inside of us to then be able to chart the path and know, okay, this is the way that I'm supposed to go. And then if I do encounter temptation, if I do hear fear's voice, if I do hear shame, I know how to combat it because I know the truth. The third habit that I want to talk about today actually comes from Matthew 5 and a few other different scriptures. So Jesus, as I shared earlier, the physical manifestation of Christ, and Christ is in every single one of us. And the reason why it's such a cool thing to analyze Jesus and like how he lived is because it's effectively a roadmap for how every single one of us can exist if we know how to really like get powered by the same Spirit that was in Jesus because it lives in us. So really, we should be able to do amazing things with our lives because we have the same power that the one who existed however many years, thousands of years ago. And even if you don't believe that he physically lived, figuratively he lived, that's still so incredibly powerful that that's ours for the taking. We get to have the real power that it was existing in Jesus to do miracles and love people and forgive people. Like we have that same power in us. So what does it look like? What does it look like for us to actually activate that and really be able to live accordingly? And so one of the third habits that I'm excited to talk about tonight is the fact that Jesus taught people. And so in Matthew 5, I wrote this down just so that I would have it easily accessible. It says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to them, and he began to teach them. And y'all, this is what is like infamously known as the Sermon on the Mountain. And he talks about being a disciple. He talks about how that looks like relating to the world. He talks about personal relationships. He talks about prayer. He talks about anxiety and like what's the cure for when you're feeling so anxious. He talks about wealth. He talks about judging others. He talks about what the golden rule is. He talks about the kingdom of heaven. He talks about basically like being effectively like what fruit comes out of you, and the way that you show up in the world around you is actually an indicator of what's inside of you. And he says, like, a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. So effectively, you shall know a tree by its fruit. So he talks about all these incredibly wise things that, frankly, so many people had never really heard about, to the point that it says at the very end, after he's done this sermon, when Jesus had finished speaking, the crowds were astonished and overwhelmed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority to teach entirely of his own volition and not as of the scribes. And so I just love this concept, y'all, that when we are actually walking in with Christ activated in us, teaching is going to be a part of how we live. And so if we're not teaching, if we're not actually allowing ourselves to share, the concept of intuition, being taught from within, if we're not actually getting into the quiet, habit number one, allowing ourselves to be taught and then led from within, then third, we're not going to be able to actually teach, which is another habit. It's almost like the outpouring, the overflow, just like how you shall know a tree by its fruit. A good tree bears good fruit. We're going to be being able to effectively teach other people because of what we're being taught from within. It's like God is our teacher, and we're learning things by like divine revelation that have never been taught to us. There are multiple points in scripture where people are almost like marveling at the disciples, and they're really astounded. They're asking, who taught these guys this wisdom? And it's because they're being taught from within. God is their teacher. Both, Jesus, the physical manifestation of Christ, is their teacher, but also these other guys later on, after Jesus is gone, they're still being taught these incredible things. People who were fishermen, who never went to school and never really had real professional training and education, they're being taught things that it's almost undescribable. Like, how did they know this? And it's because they've activated intuition, being taught from within, divine revelation. And y'all, I've experienced this for myself. Like, if I, of all people, can say that I know it's true, I never went to college, and I have found and experienced things that I feel like God has taught me and shown me. And then I'll pick up a book by like a great stoic or a philosopher, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're saying the same things. People have screenshotted things in these great books that everybody knows, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is about knowing. Like, they're talking about knowing here. So every single one of us has access to this treasure trove within us, which is the Spirit of God that can be taught, and then we get to then teach other people. There's this infamous quote, and it effectively says something along the lines of, if you want to really learn something, start teaching it. And so if we want to actually really get strong in something that we believe, start teaching it. Start really coming to kind of into the battlefield, into the arena where you start sharing and you start training other people, and then you get asked questions, and then people can kind of help you better refine your message. And it's not teaching to bang it over to the head of somebody else. It's teaching by way of, I'm exploring this. I'm coming to learn it myself. And man, it's such an effective way to learn and deepen our own knowledge and our own knowing of what God is showing us, this divine revelation. And so every single one of us, because of who Jesus is and how Jesus lived, the same power that was in him is in us. And so if we want to truly be like Christ and activate Christ within us, man, we got to start teaching. And there's something about the process of teaching. Even this evening, I was in the car. My sister was driving a friend of mine and I back to our hotel, and she started teaching us something that she was learning recently. And I saw her eyes light up and her voice quicken, and she got excited. And man, was she like electric. She was so excited about what she was sharing. Now, this was a class that she was taking about classical music, right? So what we're teaching doesn't have to be some philosophical study, but it can be something that is really resonant with us, that is exciting to us. And then the more we talk about it, the more we're kind of effectively teaching and then solidifying it in our own minds and hearts. And then it allows for it to deepen, and then we can build on that foundation. Another time in scripture where I thought this was such a beautiful passage It's actually in Acts, where Paul is going to two different parts of I think the first part, I actually don't know where he is, but in the next section of Acts 17, he's in Greece. So Paul, who never actually met Jesus, but he's acting out the habit of Christ. And he says, and this is what Acts 17 says, early verse 1. When Paul and his companions had passed through two different cities, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. And as was the custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days, he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. So kind of part number 1 is that he's going into a very religious setting and going and reasoning with these people and actually using the scripture to defend his points. And yesterday we were talking about when Jesus was led into the wilderness, he was basically battling with the devil, and the devil would tempt him with scripture that was twisted ever so slightly, and then Jesus would fight back with scripture that effectively brought the truth home. And so when fear comes into our lives, when shame comes in, so often it's taking the truth and twisting it ever so slightly. And it's so hard for us to stay really rooted and grounded in what is the truth. And so we have to have a really clear understanding of this is what's true, and I'm going to stand on that and build my foundation. And one of actually the examples that Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount is comparing two different types of foundations, one that's built on a rock, so that when the wind blows and the waters come, the house stands because it's built on a firm foundation. But if it's built on sand, it's going to be washed away with the storm. Hey, everyone, just wanted to check in on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really glad you guys are here tonight. We're just talking about the habits of Christ. Sam, I just saw you say the incarnation of Marilyn Monroe. What a compliment. I love that. Thank you for joining. There's something about kind of moving to the second section of Acts 17, just to get back into this, where he's now, the first section of Acts 17, he's talking to folks in a religious context, in a religious setting. But later on, it says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue, both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day and night with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. And it was so interesting to me. This is what I love, is that he had the schooling and the education in addition to the divine revelation to be able to go toe-to-toe with some really brilliant folks, not just in the religious setting, but outside of that. Like with the Stoic philosophers, he could kind of keep up with them and have these really intellectual conversations. So there is something about allowing for the divine revelation to be taught from within, but then also going to the scriptures, going to other books and philosophies, and allowing for God to speak to us as we read. Let him open our eyes as we're looking and exploring and learning, and then continuing to teach and solidify that which we have come to have revealed to us. There were a few other sections that I just wanted to talk about tonight. As Jesus, going back to Christ as our example here, Jesus didn't always engage. He didn't always teach. There were times where he actually really pulled back and really kind of like kept a guard over his mouth and a guard over his time. He knew the importance of every single interaction. He really, really valued not just the words that he spoke, but who he was talking to. And so he was actually really careful to dole out what he said to the right audience. In that Sermon on the Mount that I was talking about earlier, he says, do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they turn on you, trample them, and then tear you to pieces. So there's something about, sharing a message that's really precious, that has been divinely revealed to us, that we need to share with so much wisdom, with so much even empathy, to cater the message to the audience for where they're at, but then also maybe withhold it. Don't share. There's this one section in John 2, Matthew 22. they're kind of, the Pharisees are baiting him. So the Pharisees were very religious people of the day. They were effectively like pastors or priests, folks in religious places that were kind of the leaders there. And what he did that was so interesting was, they would challenge him and try to get him and trap him in what he was saying. And there's this word he says, there's a section, he says, he would not entrust himself to them, which I really, really love. And there's something about that, y'all, that I think is really, really important, especially as we head into Christmas. I would imagine many of us have people in our lives that are not necessarily 100% in our corner and wanting what's best for us. And so if we have something that we're learning, if we have something that's really important to us, something precious, it's so important that we actually keep that close to our chest, especially if it's something we're vulnerable over. Maybe it's not necessarily something that we're ready to teach yet, but it's something that, man, we're working through, that we're processing, that very well could actually have something to do with our calling and why we're here on earth. I really believe every single one of us has divine access to God, that then we have something to give to the rest of the world. We have something unique that we get to teach because of our experience, because of who we are. It's like the unique makeup of our experience and our story. It's like our soul and our story and how those come together. Every single one of our experiences, when kind of combined, man, they make up such an incredible testimony that we then get to share with the world that no one else ever will have. And so that testimony, when it's raw and in the making, it's actually not wise to go and talk about that with just anybody, especially if that person may not actually have our best interest at heart. So it was so interesting reading and understanding how Christ engaged with different audiences that he found himself around. Sometimes he really did not disclose things that were on his heart or on his mind, and he really kind of kept himself closed off. And then there are other times where he starts asking questions and he draws people out. And then other times where he just sits and talks to them. So the method of Christ teaching. So habit number 3, Christ taught. He taught in so many different ways. And it was really based on what the quality of what he was saying, the environment, and the audience. So it's so important for us as we head into the holidays, as we're heading into 2026, who are the people that are receptive, that are open, that genuinely want us to be around? There's going to be more openness for them to hear from us and hear our testimony. And again, if our testimony is still kind of in that raw, tender place of being in the making, then we really need to be careful who we're sharing with and who we're talking about and talking with about what we're learning. And then in that time and in that process, sometimes the tending to and the healing and the learning actually comes just by way of talking about it. We actually come to discover so much about God and the world around us and ourselves by way of sharing and talking through when we are in that tender place. So, y'all, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Debone, I just saw you shared, be careful how you pray. Everyone's listening. That's so interesting. I love that concept. There is something about just having a guard over our mouths, and being so careful and so intentional with everything that comes out, because to your point, people are listening. And I really, I'm grateful for this time to share with you guys tonight. And I would love to hear from you all. What are the practices that you've been putting into place for yourself? What are the habits that have been so consistently helpful for you? And I know that when I started going live in June 23rd of this year, I'll have been going live, I think it's like 180 days at this point. And there have been so many times, I've had wonderful guests on here, but by way of simply showing up, whether there were people joining or not, the repetition and encouraging me to talk and share and teach, I learned, and so I would so encourage every single one of us has something. We have a unique perspective, a unique gift that the world needs. And so the more that we actually start sharing and talking about it, man, is there so much encouragement, so much life that we get to give those around us if we're bold enough and willing to share. So with that, thank you all so much for joining, and I will